Hello, this is Teresa. Happy 2019, and I'm back with my first video for Dare to be Artsy. I'm going to be using the Teddy Bear Hug stamp and coordinating die set to create a beautiful little Valentine's card. So I'm showing you the pattern paper that I will be using. It's pretty in pink, and I'm going to be using the reverse side with the gingham print on it. And I'll show you how I used a prototype to plan my final project. So this is what I experimented with beforehand. I was going to put those little cards on that little acetate strip, but I ended up changing my mind and coming up with a new plan. So I'm beginning by stamping the bear out of the set onto some Nina Solar white cardstock, 80 pound, with Memento black ink. This is safe for Copic markers, which is what I will be using to color the bear today for the card. And instead of using the Misty for the smaller stamp, which is a little card with a heart in it, I'm just going to use a little block and I'm going to stamp out that same image 9 different times. If I mess up on one of the stamps, I could just keep going on that piece of paper to get a better image. It turned out fine with the first 9 that I stamped here, so I use those to do the coloring with. Now I'm going to start with the bear, and I'm going to show you each of the marker combinations I'm using. For the bear, I'm using some browns starting with E57, and I'm just going to color the entire bear with that same marker color before adding some additional shading with some of the other darker colors. So this is just an easy way to lay down color to start with and then work on the little details as I move through the entire process. And while I'm doing some of this coloring, I thought I would share with you that I'm going to be at Creativation 2019 later this week, and I'm going to be spending some time at the Dare to be Artsy booth. So if you plan to be at the show, I hope you will stop by and say hello. I will be spending some time there as well as in some other classes. So now I've moved on to the E77 marker, which is darker brown marker, and I'm just adding a few more details where the stamp has some additional little lines and such, and then I'm going to be blending that out with the E57 marker that I used before to blend it all together. Now what you can see is I'm kind of going outside the lines. I'm kind of flicking the marker and going outside of where the stamp lines are because I want my little teddy bear to be as fluffy looking as he possibly can. Now when I was playing around with my example piece, I tried coloring the overalls on the bear with a pink marker, and I decided it really didn't look as cute, or at least I didn't think it did in pink. And I also wanted some more contrast with that pink gingham pattern paper that I'm going to be using. So I decided to, when I created the actual project, that I would paint the overalls that the bear is wearing in red and accent the overalls with that middle piece. It looks like a little pocket with some crosshatch on pattern on it, and I will use pink in that middle section as a contrast to the red on the rest of the overalls. So I'm just following the same process as far as coloring in the arms. I started with E57. I'm going back in with E77. I am adding some shading to the arms. I'm going to also flick some of the color along the edge of the arms to make the bear look fluffy, just like I did with the head a little bit earlier. I'm going to blend all that in with the E57 marker again, and by the time I'm done, I end up with what I think is actually really cute bear. Doesn't look like necessarily he was stamped down before. And so now I'm at the feet and just filling that in again with the E57 marker on both sides, and then I will go back with the E77 to add more detail before I move on to the overalls that the bear is wearing. So I use the E77 to accent the claws on the toes. I'm adding a little shading along the bottom of the bear. I kind of dot in some different areas so that it doesn't look as, like I said, the rest of it, I want it to look fluffy and furry, so I spent quite a bit of time emphasizing that part. Now I went back to the face and I'm using an E13 marker to color in the base color for the part where the nose is. Then I'm going to go in with E57 from the sides and add a little more contrast, and I'm basically just kind of making a border around the edges. And then after that's done, I'm going to take the E13 marker and blend that all in, so it's an overall lighter color than the rest of the bear's face. And with that, all I have left is the nose, and I'm using E49. It is a very dark brown marker, so I'm using that to color in the nose. And I'm using a white gel pen so that I can add, basically get some more detail back from the eyes. A little bit later, I realized that I have to use some black marker to fill in the eyes because I covered too much of it up. So now I've moved on to the overalls, and the first color that I put down overall is R24. And then I'll come back in later after filling in that color. I'm going to start adding some depth and dimension to this with the R29, but you'll see as I go on a little bit further in the process that that wasn't quite enough detail and depth for me, so I ended up pulling in a third marker to help add that dimension so that my bear doesn't look flat. So now I'm getting close to finishing the base color of that with that R24, and about to move on to R29 and add some contrast here. So start around the edges of the overalls where the lines are already, or the little creases in the pants are already there from the stamp, that detail. So I'm first starting with R29 to see how much contrast that this gets me first. And as I look at this, I realize it's contrast, but not quite enough for me. So I pull out an R59 marker, and I'm going to add some more depth in the places where I think that the overalls would look darker, such as right below the bear's head where those straps are coming over the shoulder. Then I'm going to add in towards the darkest places, towards the inside of the pant legs. And then I will blend that in with the R29 marker so that it don't have any harsh lines there. And that is looking a lot better. There I am, just adding a little more detail with the R59 marker and blending it out with the R29. And the next part that I will do is that little pocket that's in the center. I start off with a little bit of R22, and then I switch to R32. RV13, because I wanted it to be a little bit lighter pink than what the R22 was giving me at first. And then I'm going to take a white gel pen, and I'm going to add a little more detail just by kind of going over some of those cross lines that are already on the overalls. And then I'm going to start coloring in all the hearts, and I'm going to color in about half red and half pink, so I'm going to skip each one and color them in. As you can see, I'm using R24 for the first batch, and since this is going to be pretty repetitive, when I switch to R22 for the pink hearts, I'm not going to be showing the entire process of coloring before I move on to adding the contrasting color on the cards. Or I guess I take it back. I did that part after I colored in all the hearts. First I used the R22 marker on the card where I put in the R24 red hearts, and then I just skip and go on to the next one so that I get that taken care of. And now I'm switching to coloring on the card front, around those little card fronts around the pink hearts. As you can see, I'm using BG13. And then I brought in the white gel pen again, and I'm just adding a little bit of highlight to each one of those little hearts. And a couple more areas, I just draw in a little bit more detail to those cards. The next step in the process is I'm going to be die cutting all these pieces. The bear has its own coordinating die. I've cut that as well as the very first card, and as I'm using purple tape here, and as long as you peel back very carefully, it won't damage any coloring that you've already done. So I will die cut the rest of them. And as you can see, I die cut another white piece of cardstock to put behind the bear because the Copic coloring was showing through the back. So now I'm planning for how I'm going to construct my little easel card. I have a piece of that pattern paper cut down to 2 inches by 5.5 inches, and I'm scoring the card base at 2 inches as well across the card front. And here's where I experimented with some different colors before I stamped the sentiment. It's a good idea to do that because if you go ahead and commit to it right away, then you could end up with the wrong colors. So it's a good idea to experiment with that first to make sure that you have exactly what you want. And so I'm putting that sentiment towards the bottom of the inside of the card. So now I'm moving back to putting the rest of it together, and I'm using some temporary adhesive to put the bear in place while I work on putting all these little individual die cut cards in place so that I can glue them. I did fiddle around with this quite some time before I was really satisfied with what was going on, so I apologize for this section being a bit long, and I'll try to cut some of that out and move on to where I was ready to move on to the next step. And now that they're arranged, I'm using some Post-it removable adhesive tape, and I'm picking up all the die cut hearts now that I have them exactly how I want them placed. And I'm going to turn over that piece of pattern paper and tape that down before I add the adhesive to the back of those little cards that I die cut earlier. I'm going to put some liquid adhesive on the back of each one of those cards, and the Post-it removable tape is keeping them exactly where I want them until I can place them. And I pick up the piece of cardstock because when I turn it over, I'll have the cards placed exactly where I want, so when this is flipped over, they will be on the opposite side. And now that they've had a chance to dry and stick, there is the first set of cards. I put the bear back with its temporary adhesive, and I'm going to repeat the same process with the last 2 little cards. And as you can see, I alternated the colors between the pink and red hearts as I went along. And so I'm going to do the same thing with these 2. I'm gluing them onto the card, or the pattern piece of paper on the front side. And then finally it is ready to start finishing putting together. So I don't want to put any glue on those little cards that are sticking up because otherwise it would get stuck to the card and it wouldn't do this easel action that I'd planned from the beginning. And the nice part about this is it hides the fact that I've already done a score on the front of the card, so when it is closed, you won't actually see that score line on the front of it. So now I'm going to add the liquid adhesive to the bear, and I'm going to make sure just to put that on the bottom portion of the bear because I don't, again, want any glue that will stick to the top of the card. And now I have that in place. And now I'm going to take the last 2 little die cut cards and adhere them to the bottom where the sentiment is. And the one on the left-hand card, on the left-hand side, can actually act as a bit of a catch point when it's standing up. I decided the front of it was a little bit boring for me, so I took another piece of that pattern paper and cut it in from a 1-inch strip into a 1/4 inch and 3/4 inch strip, and glued that down to the front of the card to make it more interesting. And my final step was to add some stickles to all the little hearts, and I thought that made it totally adorable. Thank you so much for spending time with me today. I hope you've enjoyed watching this video. If you haven't subscribed yet, I hope you will leave a thumbs up and consider subscribing. Thank you, and look forward to seeing you again.